I'm Susan Williams, and I'm with GRCC's Social Sciences Department. I'm a professor of history here. We're lucky today to have Michele Norris from NPR. She's here for our diversity lecture series. She's our speaker for the evening, and she's going to be giving us a talk today about eavesdropping on America's conversation with race, and we're very happy and excited to have you here with us today for our little interview. I was reading today a little bit from your book, The Grace of Silence, that came out, I think, in 2010.
That's right.
And I was really interested in your introduction. One of the things we always have such a hard time getting through to our students is the idea that race is constructed, that it's not biological. But you said something really cool, and I'm totally going to steal it for all my classes from this point on. You said that it's racial identity is forged by experience.
Yes.
And I thought that was such a cool way to say it, because we're always very, in our history classes, it's a social construction, but it seems so static when we say that. And I thought it was so cool. Could you tell us a little bit more about the idea that it's forged by experience?
Of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you. Race is made up. It's made up and yet very real. Race might be made up, but history is very real. And history informs how we live today. And the idea that our identity, at least our racial identity, is something that goes so far beyond just skin color or hair texture or accent. It's the sum of your experiences. It's the stories that you hear at the kitchen table. It's the songs that were sung in your home or in your place of worship. It's the smell from the kitchen. And even that is not fixed, because there may be a point where your identity is very present because you're in a particular space, you're with the elders in your family, but then you go to a place like this, you're at a university campus, and you maybe have to put a little piece of your identity off to the side because you're in an environment where you might not want to use a certain accent, or you might feel like you need to assimilate in some way. So race is kind of, it's very real, yet it's something that is an immutable characteristic, but yet it's not fixed. It's often changing. It's changing from generation to generation. My experience with race is very different than my parents'. My children's experience is very different than mine, but even my own is different depending on where I am. I experience race in a very different way when I go to Birmingham, Alabama, where my father is from, than I do when I go to Minnesota, where my mother's family is from, than I do when I walk into a newsroom and I'm delivering the news. And race is something very different there than when I walk into the beauty shop and I can literally let my hair down in a way that I might not when I'm in the newsroom. So, people can be a lot of different things and experience race in a lot of different ways. One of the lessons for me from the Race Card Project, though, is that this idea of racial and cultural identity, as I said, goes so far beyond skin color, because sometimes people say, well, if I'm a Caucasian, I don't really have that kind of cultural identity. Well, yes, you do, because you have certain smells in your kitchen, too. And you heard certain songs in your home and in your place of worship. And your cultural identity might not be as vivid as someone else's based on the tone or the temperature or the experience that they have, but it's still relevant.
Oh, I think that's a great way to say it. And I love the idea of the smell of the kitchen, too, because I think it's so hard for people to personalize. And this is what I really like about your work in particular, is I feel like you've given people a way to personalize a conversation about race that doesn't exclude people. And oftentimes I think, and I've seen that even, I was looking on your website, which for the audience here, it's theracecardproject.com. And you can look at all the race cards that people have written before and all these examples and these experiences that people have shared. And I think that it allows people to personalize the conversation and tailor it in a way. So could you tell the audience a little bit about the Race Card Project?
Isn't it amazing when you look at the website? I mean, I run the website, and I still am amazed when I look at it. Every day I am astonished, surprised, enlightened, enriched by whatever comes over the transom into the inbox. What I've asked people to do simply is to think about the word race, and then think of whatever comes to your mind. Don't overthink it, but experiences, observations, thoughts, laments, triumphs, memories, whatever it is, then try to condense that into one sentence that has only 6 words. So your thoughts about race distilled into one sentence with 6 words. And people will send me their 6-word submissions on postcards. They'll send them via Twitter with their thumbs on handheld devices, or they will go to the website and submit them. And what's happened in the 3 years that I've been doing this is, in many cases, the 6 words is just the start. So now that people submit electronically in particular, I started to ask a simple question after they submit their 6 words: anything else? And then people would fill in the story behind their 6 words. So what you see now on the website are people's 6-word stories, but then they explain what they meant by that. My son's not half, he's double. And then, an explanation of what that means. 2 white dads, 3 black children. And then I actually have a few of those. Those are the exact words from a few different people. But each of them explains their experience. And one noting that a family tableau that looks like that gets lots of stares, whether they're on Main Street or whether they're in a rural Walmart. And so what it is a chance for people to tell their story in their own way, on their own time. And most people sign their names, if you've noticed, and many people now send their pictures in. And so it's the equivalent, I'd say it's like the equivalent of putting a basket on the table and saying, tell me your stories. And people put their stories in the basket, but at the same time, you're able to reach into that basket and learn about someone else. And so it's this, perhaps a safe space where people can say things that you might not be allowed to say in the public sphere. If you've noticed a lot of the statements when you read them, you can't imagine someone saying that at a dinner party or in front of a microphone. Sometimes I'm angry at white people. White, not allowed to be proud. If someone said that at the dinner party, even would sort of, oh, wow, things are about to get interesting, aren't they? But that's exactly what happens on the site, is that people feel like they can say this in this space, and at the same time, they can learn a little bit about life as lived by someone else. And so often when we talk about race, there's this perceived toxicity, that people order their steps very carefully, afraid that they'll say the wrong thing. And this is a space where apparently people feel that they can step outside of that and say things without opprobrium or sanction.
Yeah, I can understand that quite a bit. I was really struck when I was reading through it again today, and just looking at all of the different kinds of examples and all the different experiences. Is there any ones, like one or two, that really always have kind of stuck out in your mind?
Yes, there are a few. There's one in particular. I remember the day it landed, and it was early on, and it was one of the submissions that helped me understand why I had to keep doing this. Because this was a crazy project I started in the 3rd floor of my house. I went to the local Kinko's and initially printed 200 of the postcards, and then it led to more postcards, and that led to the creation of the website, and all of this, while I was also doing lots of other things. It was sort of my side project. But one example was a 6-word statement sent to me by a woman whose name was Michele. She lived in Covington, Louisiana. Her last name was P, Covington P. She didn't give me her full last name. And her 6 words were, "Black babies cost less to adopt." And I remember that. And I'd heard something about this, and I'd actually done some reporting on this a long time ago when I was at ABC News. But that one really pulled me up because of the story that she told along with it. She said that she and her husband were not infertile, but decided to adopt because they wanted to expand their family, and they also wanted to provide a home for a child who needed it. And when they went through the process, they discovered that indeed there was this cost structure, fee structure. You don't buy children. It's not that's not the case. But there is a fee structure that is part of the adoption system. And the fees that are associated with the adoption of children of color are significantly lower than they are for Caucasian children. And this really bothered her. And it really bothered her that her son, when he grew up, might learn this. And she was concerned about what that would say to him. And I wound up doing a lot of research around this, and we actually did a segment for Morning Edition. We do race card segments occasionally at NPR. And we were never able to talk to her. She didn't want to talk to us on the record. She preferred to remain just Michele P. But we had lots of other submissions that started to come in around the same thing. Over time, there were several similar stories, so we found other families who would talk to us. And indeed, she told the truth, that there is a sliding scale in the fee structure that is based on the skin color and cultural background of the child. And no one's comfortable with it. In some cases, it is there for completely altruistic reasons. The adoption process is not federalized. I mean, it's different state by state, but this is true in virtually every state. And in many cases, it is the lower fees are the result of an effort to bring more families into the adoption process. So they reduce the fee in the hope that a family that might otherwise be locked out of the adoption process because it's too expensive would be able to participate. So no one likes the word discount, but they have reduced fees to serve as an incentive. So there are altruistic reasons, but at the same time, everybody that we talk to in the system, everyone, every single person said it's also just a basic reflection of our value system, and it is also a reflection of the laws of supply and demand. And that 6 words just says so much about who we are as a society. So, that's an example of 6 words that always stuck with me. I mean, sometimes they're a whole story unto themselves. Grandma sent $100 when we broke up. And don't you want to know more about that story?
Absolutely.
I mean, was it a consolation? Did Grandma think that he felt bad and so he needed $100, or was it a reward? Where Grandma was saying, glad you got rid of her. Here's $100. I mean, you just don't.
Yeah.
You don't know. Did my Southern grandpa attend lynchings? You're pretty for a dark-skinned girl. I have dozens of those. And each woman, in sending them in, tells her own story. And we had a bunch of them around the Oscars, when the actress who won the Best Actress role, Lupita Nyong'o, won for it. I hope I said her name correctly, for her role of Patsy in 12 Years a Slave. And in that case, there was such a discussion around that. I actually went to Twitter, and people were saying, you're making too much of her skin color, and other people were saying, no, her skin color is significant. She speaks for so many of us when she talked about having struggling with it sometimes, and just in embracing her beauty and wanting to stand up and say.
She said beautiful things about beauty,
and she talked about
young
that.
Girls.
That she wants people to recognize that beauty comes in all shades, and she felt that she, in particular, had a special opportunity to say that. And I went to Twitter and I said, if you want to understand something about the deep significance of her Oscar victory, go to the website and put in the words "dark" and "skin" in the search field and see what comes up. And indeed, dozens of submissions come up with individual people telling their stories, sometimes through humor, sometimes through pain, but always with honesty. And it was a way for people to understand that, on a very personal level, not just the Hollywood, the tremendously talented Hollywood actress who represents one story, but all kinds of people, men and women, parents, school children, a teacher who realized that she was making choices based on skin color that she wasn't even aware of. Why is it that all these students always wind up over here and all these students wind up over there? She realized she had to check herself. And this was a woman of color. And she still had it. So, it's just this wonderful window into these kind of private conversations that you don't usually get to examine in the public sphere.
It's amazing. It was interesting that you brought up the story about the card about adoption, because that's actually what brought you onto my radar. I was listening to NPR one morning, and this was a couple of a year and a half ago, I think, or something.
It was in the last year.
Yeah,
yes.
And one morning I'm driving into work, and I swear I almost wrecked my car. Like, I was listening, and it was so powerful when you read those 6 words. And I went in that day and said, I really think that we need to bring in, for this race and ethnicity conference we have every year, I really think that we need to bring in this person. This is such a striking thing to say out loud, and for somebody to have written down those 6 words and made the choice of those 6 words and put that on a piece of paper to sum up what they think about race was just so deep and powerful.
So many people have lived it. You know?
Right. And then when you think about it, and then you start to connect all of these other stories along with it, in just that one small segment on NPR, it was just such a powerful moment for me alone, where I was just thinking, I teach gender classes, and I always try to talk to my students about intersectionality and particularly about race and class and gender. And so I even have brought that up regularly with my students, that one story, and they're going to be there tonight, actually, that class in particular, because it was just such a moment for me where I just said, wow, it's amazing how you can read whole books, hundreds of pages on race, and think, that was very interesting. But then you get 6 words, and it just almost makes you slam on the brakes in your car and think, it's so much more powerful than reading hundreds of pages about theory and everything else. And experience just matters so much.
Well, and the thing about race is we often examine it in moments of crisis, and it's often attached to really big, monumental, historic chapters. So it's, the election of America's first black president, or Trayvon Martin, or the civil rights movement, or the Dred Scott case, or something that's sort of, like a totem in some ways. But if you go back to identity and the question of experience and identity, the experiences that shape your identity are often not just the big ones.
Right.
They're the little teeny ones. So someone sends, actually we have several people have sent in 6 words about the retail experience. Change in hand, not on counter. So going to a store and recognizing that they won't put the money in your hand, they'll put it on the counter. And sort of the microaggressions that are at work in that. Where are you really from? Where do you really come from? Now you might ask that question, and it's just an expression of curiosity. But to someone else's ear, it sounds like, oh, you're trying to point out that I'm not really American. And I understand that differently, because so many submissions have come in around something small like that. Purses clutched tighter when I approach. The idea of walking onto an elevator, and as a young black man, and realizing that every woman on the elevator has consciously or subconsciously gripped her pocketbook just a little bit tighter, and how a little piece of him dies inside when that happens. Or the woman who writes in about realizing that she locks cars when she sees certain people on the street, and she can't even understand why she really does it, but it's such an ingrained reaction. It's those little teeny things that you often don't find in history books, or that we don't discuss around those big moments. But that's what when we talk about how experiences help form our identity, it's often those little moments.
Right. And accepting that people have those little moments, which is always something very interesting to me, where particularly with microaggressions, when you talk to people about people's experiences, they'll say, that shouldn't matter to people, or that's people overreacting. And I think it's nice on your website in particular, you can plug in those terms, and you realize this isn't just 1 or 2 people seeing this thing, right, and saying that made them feel in a certain way. There are hundreds of responses for certain things that you plug into your, just the purse alone, right, and clutching purses that you plug into your website.
You put the word person.
Oh gosh, and it's amazing what comes up there. And then it's not just, people being able to dismiss a microaggression at that point. It's somebody, you have to, if you're a rational person who has any empathy within yourself at all, you have to acknowledge at that point, wow, maybe the people who talk about this, maybe I do need to listen to people. Maybe, when microaggressions come up and somebody says, this is how this makes me feel, maybe that's a powerful moment that instead of me reacting to it, and this is one thing I always try to get through to my students, it's so easy to react, it's lazy to react. We think it's action, but it's really actually laziness. In reality, it's hard to be humble. It's hard to sit and listen.
It's hard to listen
quiet.
To someone who doesn't agree with you, because you will see, it's not all angst on the site. I mean, there's certainly a lot of that. It's race, so that's not surprising.
But there are really happy stories.
But there are. Well. There are great. There are happy stories. There are stories about that really help explain the evolution of thought and the evolution of sort of minds and hearts in this country. A lot of older people are on the site talking about what used to be and what is now, and realizing they weren't always on the right side of history. There are a lot of submissions from white Americans in a conversation about race, which doesn't always happen, because many conversations about race, diversity programs, and the like are sort of by, for, and about people of color, and this is really a multi-hued experience. And there are also, stories from people who use humor in some cases to talk about something that's very painful, who talk about, who share memories in trying to reach back and make sense of something. And there are cases where you have to really try to figure out, okay, now I could just flip back past this because this doesn't apply to me. But if I listen to this, I might learn something. I mean, I'll just pluck one, the Confederate flag, for instance. If you put the words Confederate flag, interesting stories will come. But I just found myself, I was at another college campus recently, and I was having a discussion with a student about this. And I said, one of the things that I've learned around this is you might not agree with people who hang Confederate flags at sports games or affix them to the back of their trucks or put patches on their jackets or their clothing or something. But there are some people who really struggle with what the flag represents and what it represents in reference to their family history. So if your family ancestry leads you to a place where the people that you love, the people who sit at your table, the people whose pictures are in your photo albums, enforced, embraced segregation, enjoyed it, weren't happy when it went away, that's a difficult place to be because there are your family members. You love them. You want to honor them. Everyone wants to be proud of their history. But you go to school and you learn that was a moment that as a country we wrestle with, that we're not necessarily proud of. And so that flag in some cases represents something that's very difficult. I tell people all the time, when you go to the site, and if you engage with the site at all, you are going to confront something that will make you uncomfortable. That's a guarantee. You will find a sentiment that will make you squirm, that may make you even want to spit. And yet, you will be enriched by the experience because you will understand even that which you don't agree with. And that is one of the founding principles of this country, as Daniel Webster said. Was it Daniel Webster? No, was it Nathaniel Hawthorne? Let me not get my history wrong. I want to be careful.
I'm not an American historian, I'm a European historian.
But I may not agree with what you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. And the idea that that in our public sphere, we can say things. We can create a space where we can disagree with each other, but hopefully at least understand each other better.
Yeah, and I think that's a really empowering thing, to be able to be humble and to listen to people and to have conversations with people and realize you don't necessarily have to walk out of that saying, I agree with that person.
You probably won't. In fact, don't assume that you will, because you most certainly...
But rather you've learned something, and there's an empowerment in learning something about somebody and attempting to understand. And it's kind of the cautionary thing of empathy, right? There's so many people now, I think, that try to always approach through empathy and think, I'll find something of somebody's story in myself. And the frank thing is, a lot of times we don't do that. And that's the danger of focusing on empathy and not focusing on humility, is that if you're always thinking you're going to find something of yourself in somebody's actions, you're always going to be angry, and you're never going to agree. You're never going to start to understand their story or understand where they're coming from, or at least be able to kind of see something, in that and try to better understand it. But rather, you're always going to be reacting to it because you're not going to see yourself in that story. And that's always so interesting to me about even the concepts of privilege and everything else. It's really difficult to have this moment where you finally have to accept, I just need to be quiet and let
but
somebody talk.
Even privilege is interesting, because there are a lot of people writing about privilege, about feeling that some are more privileged than others, about having to unpack their backpack, full of privilege. But I also hear from a lot of people say, what is this thing about privilege? Someone would say, I'm Caucasian and I'm supposed to be privileged. I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent on Thursday. Oh, how is it that I am privileged just because of my skin color?
Right.
And when you have the conversation around privilege, that person's voice is often not included.
Yeah.
And in this case, they too have a seat at the table.
Yeah. And I think that's a great way for us to wrap up right now. And thank you so much for being with us, and I'm really excited to hear your talk tonight.
Susan, thank you.